Hey everybody, welcome to Something to Bark About, the podcast where we're going to talk about dogs, dog training, and whatever else strikes my fancy. My name is Chad Mackin, and I will be your host and your guide on this journey into the world of dogs. Hey everybody, welcome back. Hope you guys had a great week here in the States. We're celebrating a 3-day weekend right now, and I am just coming up at the end of it. I got to go back to work tomorrow, but I've had a great weekend. I hope all of you who had the opportunity to celebrate the Labor Day weekend had a great time, but I hope all you who didn't are doing great working with your dogs and whatnot. I want to start with telling you guys about what happened to me on Friday, because I think it's very illustrative of some of the things that we deal with as trainers. Especially there's a balance we have to strike between telling people what they need to know, like technically the technical information that they need to know to become better at trainers, and shielding them from too much concept, too much jargon, too much like getting too deep into it, because like that's stuff that I like to geek out on, as you guys probably know already. I love to geek out on that stuff, but a lot of people don't, and the people who don't are often the people who are going to hire dog trainers, because I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people who like to geek out and hire dog trainers, but most people who hire dog trainers are hiring us to solve their problem, not to educate them any more about dogs and dog behavior than they really need to get better. And so there is this balance, and a lot of trainers shy away from talking about anything technical or anything science-based for a lot of these reasons. But this is a good example of where that can come in handy. I go outside to meet somebody for a training consult on Friday. There, it's a beautiful day outside, so she's decided to wait outside for me. And I get out there, and her dog comes up to me, and this dog looks like it's about a 6-month-old shepherd, German shepherd. And as he approaches me, his head is kind of low, and his tail is kind of low, not tucked, but certainly not comfortable. And his head, his ears are just a little back, like so. The picture a dog who's a little bit uncertain, but also a little curious, right? That approach avoidance kind of mindset. And so as the dog approaches, I grab a handful of food out of my pouch, and I ask the owner, can he have treats? And by the way, rookie mistake, giving a dog treats without asking the owner first. Like the dog might have allergies, or the dog might be food protective. Like just always ask before you produce that stuff, right? So the dog had treats, and she says yes. I said okay. I put my hand out. The dog sniffs it for a second, kind of looks at me like, I don't know if I trust you or not, and eventually starts eating the food, and we're all good. And as we're standing there talking, getting to know each other, she tells me the dog is like 3 years old, so not a 6-month-old shepherd, so kind of like a dog who looks like a miniature shepherd, which is interesting because I have a dog that I thought was a full-grown Belgian Malinois when I found her, and turned out she was full-grown too. So again, I thought she was a baby, a puppy, a Malinois puppy, sorry, but she was already full-grown. So kind of cool little aside there. Anyway, so as we're standing there talking about her dog and whatnot, and just getting to know each other, like we haven't gotten into the problems. Like she's telling me, how old the dog is and this sort of stuff. Another dog comes out of the building, and we're maybe 100, 200 yards or feet, not yards, 200 feet away from the door. And if that, probably less than that, and the door to the building. And this dog comes out with its owner. And the dog that I'm talking to, and whose name has escaped me completely, forgive me, but the dog that I'm working with starts to growl and bark a little bit, not like just like like that sort of uncertain. I'm not sure about you, but I want you to know that I'm here and I'm potentially dangerous. And the owner is like pulling on the collar and whatnot, and I just put my hand with the food in it right in front of the dog's face, and the dog stops barking immediately, sniffs my hand, starts eating the food. And I do this a couple of times, and then the dog's like looking at me and not looking at the other dog, and they get in the car and drive off. And then a few moments later, like really quick, another dog comes out, and the same thing happens, but this time the dog is looking at my hand more than the barking has gotten less noticeable already. And so I started explaining to the owner, that her dog sees these situations as potentially dangerous or an effort to jump into conflict-based play. But from the body language, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing this dog is a little uncertain, a little scared of these other dogs. And what I'm trying to do is make him less frightened of the other dogs by associating the presence of dogs with good things. And she goes, but aren't you just rewarding the wrong behavior? And right there, I knew I had to deal with this issue, right? So this is a very common misconception. I hear trainers say this a lot. And so I have to explain to her the difference between operant and classical conditioning. Now, again, I don't like to get into a lot of jargon. I don't like to get into a lot of technical stuff. But she'd already been exposed to some of it, like this concept of aren't you rewarding the wrong behavior? That is stuff that trainers will say. And I have been guilty of saying in my past, So it's like, okay, listen, I don't really normally like to get too technical. But to make this the easiest to communicate, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of jargon real quick. And she said, okay. So I said, so there are basically two types of learning that dog trainers rely on, right? There's what's known as classical conditioning. There's what's known as operant conditioning. And she's like, okay, I gotcha. I said, so classical conditioning is what, Pavlov, what we talk about Pavlov's bell, right? And, Pavlov rang his bell, fed the dog, rang his bell, fed the dog, rang his bell, fed the dog. And eventually he rang the bell and the dog started to salivate as if food was present. And she's like, yeah, I'm familiar with that story. Most people are. A few people go, oh, that's interesting. But most people have heard that story in some form or another. And actually, that's not the true story. Just before people start sending me, hate mail, I know, number one, that it was a metronome and not a bell. All right. And before we get into the next part, before you correct me on that, I also know dogs were not free to move about. They were fairly well restrained, and it was a pretty technical experiment because he wasn't experimenting on teaching dogs to salivate when they heard a bell or a metronome, right? But the example still stands, those things notwithstanding. Okay, the technical details of what Pavlov did are irrelevant to this. The findings are what's most important, right? So I said, now Pavlov, he fed that dog no matter what the dog was doing. The dog didn't have to, sit or lay down, or dog could be barking, the dog could be quiet, the dog could be whatever, and he fed that dog. So the dog learned bell means food is coming, period. Food is coming, period. And what happened was he had a physiological response to that. And she's like, yeah, okay, I got that. So the first type of learning doesn't depend on what the dog does. It's just drawing a connection between two events with a relevant outcome, right? And this is an important part of it. And if the pattern doesn't have any relevance to the dog's, if he's going to learn, it's not going to change anything, right? He might figure it out, but who cares, right? This is why a dog who might not get concerned or excited, depending on how he feels about baths, when you go grab your towel and go into the bathroom, but will have a different response when you grab a dog towel and go to the bathroom. Or if they see you walk by the front door without your keys or your purse or without your shoes on, they might react differently than if they see you grab your purse and head to the door, right? Because there's one event has relevance, the other doesn't. Or if you say they see you walk towards the door with their leash and collar, right? So relevance is required for at least first to know they learn the pattern, right? They might memorize it, but again, who cares? So I'm like, Pavlov's dog learned this, and it wasn't dependent on what he did. And she's like, okay. I said, the next type of learning is operant conditioning, and that essentially means the dog is required to do something. And it is in this operant model and this idea where we talk about reinforcement and punishment. If you think about it, right? If the dog doesn't have to do anything to change the outcome, or I should say if the dog's behavior doesn't change the outcome, you're not teaching the dog to do or not do anything. And this is really important. It didn't matter what this dog did. He saw another dog and food showed up. He saw another person and food showed up. Right now, if I waited till he started barking or growling to present the food, then yeah, I might inadvertently change it into a reinforcement situation. But if my behavior is consistent no matter what the dog does, then the dog does not learn that he does anything to change the outcome. And that's so important because I don't want the dog to change his behavior because he's looking for me to do something in and of itself. In other words, I don't want the dog to be saying, if I do this, Uncle Chad will produce this reward. That's not what I want. What I want him to do is go, oh, wow, other dogs mean good things. Right now, he's already been classically conditioned. Already right now, he sees another dog and he has a history of being frightened and feeling fear and uncertainty And yes, he may have been reinforced for barking and growling, because if he barks and growls, that other dog goes away. So that there may be an operant element there. But that behavior, that growling and barking, begins with an emotion. That growling and barking begins with the realization that I don't feel comfortable with what's going on and I want to change it, right? It is a response to fear and uncertainty, not a effort to create a particular outcome necessarily, right? And so when I put that food in front of him, I'm not telling him, don't bark and I'll give you this food. I'm telling him, hey, isn't this interesting? When dogs show up, so does food. And what I want is I want his emotional response in that dog to change. When he sees a dog, I don't want him to go, oh my God, what am I going to do? This dog's scary. Maybe I can make it go away. I want him to go, hey, when this dog shows up, food shows up. Where's the food? There's a dog over there. That means there's food around here somewhere. Where is it? And he starts looking around for it. That moment, I can change from a classical model to an operant model. In other words, I can start to go, okay, now he wants it. Now he knows it's possible. Now it's on his radar. Where's the food? And then I can go, hey, look at me. And then I can only give the food when he looks at me. And suddenly we're doing reinforcement. I'm reinforcing the right behavior. But until I get him to start thinking, where the hell is that food that normally shows up? I can't operantly condition anything. I mean, I could just punish him. I could just hit him real hard with a prong collar or a e-collar correction, right? And that's what a lot of people do. That's what I did for many, many years. But I don't have to do that, right? If I just get him to start to associate, be less frightened, and see that dog as an opportunity as opposed to a threat, then he starts to make that opportunity happen, starts to try to make that opportunity happen. And in that moment, I can start to say, okay, now, if you want this, you have to do this. So if you think about it, operant conditioning is a very specific subset of classical conditioning. Like, so classical conditioning means when one or more conditions is present, a third condition will be present, or a fourth, or whatever, right? So if this is true and this is true and this is true, then this thing is about to happen, right? It could be as simple as dog shows up, food shows up, but it could be, again, more complicated, like I talked about earlier. You grab your keys and you grab your purse and you head to the door. That means you're leaving. Just head towards the door, walk by the door, even open the door without your keys, purse, or shoes. Maybe the dog doesn't think it means anything, right? Get near the dog's food dish at dinner time, it might be a different reaction for most dogs than it is if you get near the dog's food dish at a time you don't normally feed them, right? So there could be several conditions for that classical conditioning, right? But the thing is, when those conditions all align, the dog has an emotional response. Oh my God, this is cool. Or, oh my God, this is scary. Or whatever. But there is a series of conditions, and when they are met, the dog has an emotional response. Right? The difference between that and operant conditioning is one of the conditions necessary for the result the dog wants or wants to avoid is dependent entirely on the dog and what they do. Food doesn't show up unless I look at Uncle Chad. Or I don't get to walk out that door and go for that walk unless I sit. So we take that moment of we create with classical conditioning, we create the desire, the optimism for an outcome. We create the idea that an outcome is likely, possible, potential, whatever. And then once they start to expect that, they have that sort of expectation for it, or at least that hope for it, then we can start to say, hey, here's something you can do to make it happen. All right. So as I stood there working with this dog for all this, for the 20 or 30 minutes we spoke, by the end of it, people were walking their dogs right by him, and he would look at the dog and he might go, woof, woof, like half-hearted. But most of the time he didn't. He look at the dog, he looked right back at me and goes, where's my food? I know this game now. Suddenly he wasn't, right? And so, were we rewarding the wrong behavior based on results? Absolutely not. We did not reinforce the wrong behavior. But we had to convince him that right thing, that valuable, that we had to convince him there was a valuable opportunity here as opposed to an opportunity to be afraid, to be threatened, to be frightened. We had to change his emotional outlook. And this is the big thing that one of the things that I wished I would have learned way earlier is that understanding that classical conditioning is such a powerful tool for affecting behavior. See, the problem is that We as dog trainers, we talk about reinforcement and punishment because we consider those to be the primary ways to change behavior. And part of this goes into the history of behavior modification, right? Because Skinner did not believe that animals had emotions. And most of science didn't believe it at that time, right? They didn't believe animals had emotions. So classical conditioning was just about memorizing patterns. Sure, it could create a physiological response, but since dogs aren't quote unquote emotional beings, they're purely operant beings. What does it matter? What does their emotion matter, right? And it's still going on today. Like I go back, I did a podcast not that long. Well, I guess it was a while back about whether dogs have emotions or not and why it matters. But absolutely, behavior is driven by emotion. Whereas the Skinner mantra was behavior is driven by consequences, right? But the thing is what I feel, what I think, what emotional content that I'm having not only determines what I want, it determines how I feel about that, what's going on, right? So if I have a positive emotional response to something, it's going to change my behavior. If I have a negative emotional response, it's going to change my behavior. Like I'm not going to act like I'm scared of something I'm not scared of. Right? And I'm not going to act like I'm happy about something I'm not happy about. Well, humans, we might do that. We might hide and lie and all this other stuff. But as a general rule, something that makes me feel good doesn't necessarily reinforce a behavior. It just makes me feel good. But that good feeling can be later on used to reinforce the behavior. So for a lot of trainers, when they talk about classical conditioning, a large portion of what they think about, they take that Pavlov bell idea and they very narrowly apply it to like, I'm going to charge my clicker. Click, treat, click, treat, click, treat. Now I say click, or now I click, and the dog goes, hey, treat, right? And that's how a lot of us, for a lot of trainers, that is about where the classical conditioning model ends, and we go into that operant model, right? Or maybe you're going to use, condition punishers like, a warning tone on an e-collar or an invisible fence, or, a no marker that precedes a punishment event, whatever, right? But for the most part, trainers seem to talk about, or for most of my career, it's getting better now, I should say, but for the most part, trainers seem to focus on operant behavior because that's really about changing behavior, right? We don't see classical conditioning as about changing behavior. But think about it. When you come home and your dog hasn't seen you all day and they get happy, they have behaviors that are associated with that, right? They jump or they bark or they spin in circles, or if you train them to sit, they sit kind of vibrating, right? Or whatever. But when your dog has an emotional response to something, that triggers behavior. Emotions trigger behaviors, period. The stronger the emotion, the stronger the behavior it triggers. So we can, through classical conditioning, change the dog's emotional response to an event, and without reinforcing or punishing a specific behavior, we can change, we'll change the palette of behaviors that is available to them, right? So like imagine you're working with a painting program and you say, I want warm colors. So they give you oranges and reds and whatever, right? Or you say, I want cool colors, so they give you the blues and that sort of thing, right? There's a palette, right? There's a palette for happy things. There's a palette for scary things. There's a palette for sad things. There's a palette for peaceful things, right? And we have to find the right palette, right? And by changing the dog's emotional response to this situation, we change the palette. They have different available choices. They have different choices available depending on how they feel. So if I can make this event with another dog something the dog is happy about, then the behavior of barking and aggressing, it doesn't necessarily go away because habit is in play here too, right? If the dog has a strong habit, he's going to probably play it out. But if we can change the emotion that's attendant to that habit, we can make it easier to avoid that habit. So I'm not saying that if you just change that outlook, you're going to make the behavior go away entirely. But in the case of this dog, we pretty much did. Like, again, he might give us that. It is a different behavior. So it's not the... It was more Woof, where's my food? Woof, where's my food? Woof, where's my food? Right? So it was a completely different approach. And that's important to understand. I think it's very important to understand when you start to break this stuff down. Even though it looks similar, the intensity was different and the motivation was different. Now it was just finishing. This is what I do in this situation, right? So if we can change the emotion the dog feels, we're going to change the behavior without ever touching that idea of reinforcement and punishment. Right? We can make a dog feel good about a thing without reinforcing a behavior. Right? So you can maybe think of it this way. Classical conditioning can create an emotion, and that emotion can produce a behavior or a series of behavior or a class of behaviors. Reinforcement or punishment will make those behaviors more likely to or less likely to be repeated in the future. So in this case, the dog had a response to other dogs early on, made him feel uncomfortable, frightened, unpleasant. And so he produced behaviors that are consistent with those things, which in this case, because of his personality, rather than the flight or the submit option, he chose to posture or fight. So he goes to posture and fight, and then it works, right? Had it not worked, maybe he wouldn't keep doing it. But the initial aggressive threat display, I should say, the initial threat display was a result of fear or uncertainty, of an emotional context. It didn't happen. He didn't go, I wonder what would happen if I acted aggressively towards this dog. He wouldn't do that if the dog was neutral or a good thing. It happened because the dog was not neutral and because the dog was a bad thing. He saw it as a potential threat and he reacted accordingly. He reacted as a dog will react when they see a potential threat or one of the options. And again, in that color palette of choices, right? And then what happens? He goes, rah, 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 and then mom pulls him away, or the owner of the dog pulls his dog across the street, and that behavior was reinforced. But he wouldn't have tried a behavior to be reinforced if he didn't have an emotional response. That choice to growl and act aggressively was dependent upon his emotional state when he saw the other dog. So classical conditioning or emotional states produce behaviors which then can be reinforced or punished. We can create emotional states through classical conditioning. And then once we've created the emotional state that we want, then we can adjust, what choice the dog makes within that framework with operant conditioning, with reinforcement and or punishment, right? So, but without that emotional impact at the beginning, you don't have a behavior to reinforce or punish. So punishment and reinforcement are about behaviors. Like we talk about the definitions, again, getting a little technical. I don't want to get too far into it, but what is a reinforcer? It's something that makes the behavior that immediately precedes it more likely to occur. A punisher is the opposite, something that makes the behavior that immediately precedes it less likely to occur. Right? But it's a response to that behavior. We are adjusting that behavior. If we're trying to adjust the dog's emotional state, that's not reinforcement or punishment, because that's not dependent on what the dog does. Right? So this is one of the things people will say all the time. And I used to be this guy. I used to have to make this argument. I mean, this is all stuff I can talk trash about it because I used to be this guy. Right? Don't pet the dog when he's afraid because you're reinforcing fear. Or what are you going to do with that aggressive dog? Throw a bunch of cookies at it? Is that going to solve the problem? Throw a bunch of cookies at my mean dog? Yeah, actually, I just did that. Now, again, don't get me wrong. This was not a high level thing. This was a low level fear response that had been reinforced, or the behavior, I should say, had been reinforced by the other dogs being moved away. I'm not talking about, this wasn't Cujo here. I'm not trying to overstate the case. But yeah, I made the dog feel better about what was going on. He stopped being a jerk. He stopped feeling the need to threaten everybody because he didn't feel threatened himself. I mean, it is so simple. But if you think strictly in terms of operant conditioning, then you're going to go, no. If I offer the reward, I'm going to reward the unwanted behavior. Which is just not. It's not what happened on Friday. Whatever theory you have about reinforcement and punishment, I'm telling you, if it says that what I did on Friday wouldn't work, it's wrong. Your theory's wrong because I watched it happen. I watched the dog get better as I offered food without asking anything of him. He goes, "Rah, rah, rah." I go, "Here, have some food." "Hey, what's up with that?" "Rah, rah, rah. Here, have some more food." Now, if I'm reinforcing growling, barking, threatening behavior, then you would expect that by the end of that 30 minutes that I spent with his owner, he would have been worse. That's what you would predict, right? But that's not what happened. So either your model is wrong, or I'm delusional, or I'm a liar. And I know I'm not a liar. I know what I saw. So you have to conclude, well, you can still conclude I'm a liar. You don't have to take my word for it, like whatever. But those are your options. Either I'm a liar, I didn't see or I don't know what I was looking at, or that model is wrong. And if it's wrong, what does that mean? Like, what does that open up for you as a trainer? What does it open for us as trainers? When we can start to apply that classical model first. I start with classical in almost everything. I got an exercise that I do a lot. I call it follow the foot or food drop, right? Depending on what day I'm talking about it. But I will use it a lot. I build, and Jay has this exercise, Jay Jack has this exercise he calls feeding from the pocket. These are all very similar ideas. And that is when that dog is in the space we want them to be in, like the left side position, that 9 o'clock position, we produce food. Now, in my case, I will stand there and I will just drop food next to my left side. Dog's on the leash. He's hanging out with me. I just drop food next to my left foot. While he's eating it, I take a step forward or 2 steps forward and I drop another piece of food by my left foot. So he gets done with that first piece of food. He looks up. He sees another piece of food by my left foot. And he runs over there and he grabs it. And as he's eating, I move away and I drop another piece of food by my left foot. And I repeat this until the dog starts to chase my left foot. Now, I put a video of this when I was first experimenting with it, and some guy, very nice guy, a bit, academic, jumped in because I had described it as classical conditioning. He said, "No, it's operant. It's not classical, it's operant because you're reinforcing the dog for coming to your foot." And I was like, "Well, yeah, but the food's there whether the dog comes to my foot or not." Right? I didn't put the food there because of something the dog did. Right? The dog just found the food and he started to go where food was. He started to go to a place he'd found food before. Right? And then it switches. Like, he's right. It does switch. And this is the thing, is there is a moment where you can take classical conditioning and turn it into operant conditioning. And that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. The dog goes, "Oh, what's that?" That like he's looking for the food. There's food. There's an opportunity for food here. In this situation, there's an opportunity for food. Where is it? Where is the food? How do I find the food? How do I find the food? And then it turns into, how do I produce the food? Right? And so in this case, the dog is not seeking my foot. He's seeking food. And then he begins to notice the pattern. The food is always around my left foot. And he's just following the pattern. And that makes him move faster because he knows where the food's going to be. But the food is present if he's looking to the left, the right, if he hangs out, if he starts to lays down there and he sniffs and licks his feet or whatever, and he looks up, their food's still there. He does nothing to make that food show up. All he's got to do is go collect it. Right? And then eventually he has to come to the foot and then the food shows up. He comes to the foot and then the food shows up. And then suddenly he's now seeking the foot because he's got to get there quicker. He's got to get there to get the food to make the food show up. It's not just there. He has to produce it with his behavior. But initially it's classical. It has nothing to do with what he does, right? And that is the thing that I think a lot of people miss. It's the thing that I think I'm struggling. Like, this section that I've done here, I have started like 6 times because it is even tough to articulate what I'm trying to say and make it clear without being confusing. And that's the problem. The line is very thin, but it's there. There is a difference. You can create behaviors that you want without using reinforcement or punishment, or you can create classes of behaviors at least. And then once you get the class of behavior you want, then you can narrow it down to the specific behavior you want. right? But the dog who sits because he wants something is not the same as the dog who sits because he doesn't want something. They look the same, but they're actually different classes of behavior. One is an avoidance behavior. The other is a seeking behavior, right? And so we want to build that towards a response. I do, at least. So the first thing I want to do is, rather than tell a dog, hey, don't bark at other dog because I'm going to, whoop your ass if you do. So I'm going to say, hey, that you're misunderstanding. That dog isn't a reason to be afraid. That dog is a reason to get excited. And here's why. Right? And that becomes the stronger signal. If we practice and repeat, we practice and repeat, we practice and repeat. All right. So this is a really powerful paradigm. And it's one that I think has been under investigated and underserved in a lot of the training community. It's getting better. It really is. But like I said before, it seems to me that early on, for most of my career, training, the classical model of training has pretty much been designed to charge markers and reward events, or negative markers too. But it's been about creating this very sudden and sharp emotional response that we can use to create better reinforcement or punishment events. But the truth is, a lot of these behaviors that these dogs offer are the result of classical conditioning, not operant conditioning. Right? I always talk about the things your dog knows, right? The things dogs know. They know what it means when you get your leash. I talked about this already. They know what it means when you take dog towels into the bathroom. They know what it means when, you grab your keys, or you put your shoes on. They know what time they get fed, right? They know when you're late home from work, right? These are all things that are classically conditioned, and they do affect behavior because there are behaviors that are associated with each of these events, right? And eventually those behaviors become either reinforced or punished by how we respond to them. But creating a pattern of predictable events that are relevant to the dog without requiring any specific behavior from the dog is a very, very good way to start to create a strong conditioned response that we can then use. We can then use to focus down into the exact behaviors we want with operant conditioning. So like I do the food drop, dogs fall on the foot, and then the food starts getting higher. They got to look up, and when I get the head up where I want it, yes. The head up where I want it, yes. Head up where I want it, yes. I'm no longer dropping the food. I'm now offering it, but I never lured the dog there. Like I didn't start with luring. I started with just dropping food and having him find it. Right? I saw a study many years ago that basically demonstrated that a dog could remember, bring a dog into a room 6 months after he's been there, and he can remember where he found a treat 6 months ago. He'll go right to that spot. Right? So we just start doing that. Now, is that operant? I don't think so. Like, he knows that's where food is, right? So he's going to go check it out. But he didn't find food because he looked there, right? He found food there, and so he went back to there, right? In other words, there was no behavior that was being reinforced. Right? He didn't do anything to produce that result. He just found food there, and now he's going to go back and check it out again. Right? So you start with that. Again, take for example, teaching place, right? The way I teach place. I don't really do a place command where I say place, but when I'm teaching duration behaviors like sit, stay, or down stay, I find that a lot of dogs are good with holding duration, but as I move away, they want to get closer to me. They don't want to be far away for a lot of reasons. And I'll use a place board or a climb platform or something like that to help with that, because platforms have this great psychological power to keep dogs in their place. You ever think about that? That's why if you ever see a dog show or any wild or any animal show, whether you be at SeaWorld or circuses back when they used to have animals in circuses, or pretty much any place you're going to see performing animals in a scripted show, when the animals aren't being used, they're always on platforms. Like I can't think of a single exception. They put that lion up on a little stool, or they put the dogs up on little. There was a guy at ISB conference last year. He did a great dog show. It was amazing, but every dog that wasn't being used had a raised bed or platform that they were waiting on for their next cue. There's a psychological power of having a dog on a platform where they don't want to get off of it, or any animal. It doesn't stop them, but it just puts a little bit of a gap. Like maybe, I don't know, do I really want to get up now? Let's see, right? And it just gives you just a little bit of an assist on that duration behavior, that stay behavior. And so, when I am working on a stay, sit, stay, or down stay, and the dog keeps wanting to get up and follow me, I'll often just take a step back and do some platform work with them. And what I do is I just put the platform down and throw some food on top of it. I'm standing next to the platform, I just throw some food on top of it. And the dog will usually eat the food off the platform, and I'll walk around a little bit, walk by the platform. I'll throw some food on it again. And the dog, what ends up happening is we start to get near the platform, the dog starts inspecting it. Is there food there? Again, I am not reinforcing a behavior. That food's there, whether the dog does anything or not. The dog is finding the food there. And that's a difference. I think it's a big difference, and I don't think people grant enough distinction there. So as I walk around, I drop the food. Dog finds the food, and he starts to get excited as we get near the platform. Where's the food? Is there food? Is there food? Now we have that class of behaviors, that seeking behavior that I want associated with that event. Now I can, a lot of times the dog will I'll start putting the food further away. Like, so if I'm on the left side of the platform, I'll put the food on the right side of the platform. The dog has to stretch. If he puts a paw on the platform, now I go operant. Boom, I drop a bunch of food as soon as he touches it. There you go. Yes, good. Yes, good. Right? If that doesn't work, I might lure the dog. Once he's really investigating the platform, he goes, where's the food? Maybe I'll give him a little bit of help. I'll start putting the food over. I'll hold the food up over the platform, and when he puts a paw into it, I go, yes, I'll drop it. Right? But for the most part, the dogs will start climbing up on the platform as on their own, and that's what creates the really strong association. Right? So I start by just getting them excited about being near the platform is the point. And then once they are looking for food, once they're expecting food, they can get disappointed that it's not there. Right? Hey, there's usually food here. Where's that food? How do I make that food show up? And when they can experience disappointment, then we can start to leverage that disappointment against their desire for food and go, hey, you want it, you got to work for it. Right? But you got to get them. Like, if I just take a dog over there, start trying to lure them onto the platform, a lot of them are like, I don't know, I don't trust you. This doesn't feel right. This feels a little sketchy. Right? But if I get them excited about the food, then they're willing to be more courageous and step up on that platform. Right? So we reward. And then what happens, here's what's interesting about that, is when I do this with a dog and I do it correctly, by the third or fourth time I've done platform work with them, if I bring them into the training room and I have that platform out on the training floor, they will go right to it. Unbidden. They'll go right to it and they'll sit on it and go, where's my food? They expect food when they're on that platform. That's how reinforcement works. The best way I know to make reinforcement work is you start with getting a classically conditioned response. And then you switch it to operant. All right. So think about that, guys. Let me know if you have any examples of this in your own world. I think it's a really powerful thing, and I think it's underused. But I'm gonna get out here, guys. I've been here for just under 40 minutes, and I don't want to ramble on. I feel like I've said what I needed to say. So let me know what you think, guys. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.